At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. These are sombre times, Kieran. No actual football to talk about this weekend, but we have questions. So carry on as usual, and if there is any consolation, at least it puts your loss of Graham Potter into some sort of perspective. But we have a couple of news stories, Kieran, before we get into the questions, all of which are very interesting. First of all, this is a big one. It's one you predicted. The Professional Footballers Association charity has been given an official warning by the Charity Commission.
Yes, there were three charges. One was, I think, breach of trust, inappropriate behaviour, and the third one was effectively one on financial mismanagement is probably the best way of putting it. So the charity was cleared on two of them, but has been reprimanded in effect with regards to financial mismanagement. This involves a payment of £1.9 million, which I think was paid into the account of the trade union instead of the charity, which I think is now called the Players Foundation. My understanding of this is that it's cock up and incompetence rather than anything malevolent. And I've got to be a little bit careful what I say. I once wrote a reference for somebody to get a job at the PFA, and they were there not a particularly long time, and they did identify certain issues which, when were brought to the attention of people in charge, I will mention no names, was just effectively ignored and swept under the carpet. So the person I wrote the reference for then decided to leave because they didn't feel that the governance of the PFA was in a way that you'd want to be associated with. And I don't think there's been necessarily huge improvements under the previous regime. At the same time, I think there has been significant improvements since Maheta Malongo has become involved. He is a lawyer by trade. He's decided not to be a trustee of the foundation because he thinks it's important that, a bit like Caesar's wife, you've not only have you got to be independent, but you've got to be seen to be independent. And things are better. Now, better's not perfect, but it doesn't reflect particularly well on previous management.
Yeah, so we've joked occasionally in the past, Kieran, about HMRC, best not to get on their wrong side. They will investigate. They are nothing compared to the Charity Commission, and that is a good thing. Essentially, the Charity Commission do an incredible and thorough job in keeping an eye on what charities are up to, which is right. Which is how it should be. And presumably this official warning, Kieran, gives them time to improve their processes even further?
Yes. And I believe, I think there's some form of internal review taking place as well, with the aim of getting things right. And sometimes things aren't as good as they can be. And we've all worked at places where things that are imperfect, but the people just go on a nod and a wink. I think things have improved there. Certainly when we had Maheta on the show, I was struck by his professionalism and his desire to have greater transparency there. So I think that's better for the members in terms, I think they can have greater confidence that a lot of the money comes sort of indirectly from the Premier League TV deal. And certainly there has been criticism levelled historically especially with regards to dementia in players, and the people involved do seem to be taking that more seriously and trying to address and accelerate research and support for that.
A long time ago, I was involved with a charity, a small charity, which I won't name because it's no longer exists for reasons that are about to become apparent. But essentially, a letter was sent, which I saw from the Charity Commission to the head of this charity, which basically said in very official language, we're going to turn around now for a week, and when we turn back, the money's going to be back in the account, isn't it? It was said in such a way as like, yep, the money's back in the account, and the person handling the charity, funny enough, is out of the country, but there you are. UEFA have put a few clubs on their naughty step, Kieran, which it just makes me laugh, because I'm not sure that an organisation that's always on your naughty step should be allowed to have a naughty step of their own. But nevertheless, they have put some people on their naughty step. Why is that?
Yes, this is a report from UEFA's first chamber, which sounds like the type of place that perhaps Jeffrey Archer used to visit. Didn't take long for the BAFTA to go, did it? And what it's done, it's looked at the financial returns submitted by clubs, and it has said, look, we've been through COVID, but there's been, I think there's 8 or 9 clubs that have been fined. So we've got from Italy, Milan, Roma, Juventus and Inter. From France, we've got Monaco, PSG and Marseille. And from Turkey, we've got Besiktas. So those have been the main ones. There's been some very small breaches elsewhere. But you say, okay, well, is this really going to impact upon clubs? Because if we take a look at the position of PSG, which, as we know, is pretty well funded, it's just paid Kylian Mbappe, what, £140 million signing on fee to renew his contract. They got a €65 million fine, of which 85% was suspended. So it's effectively cost them about £8 million. Now, 8 million quid to PSG, that to me doesn't have a much of a deterrent effect. Either does paying the rest of the fine, should it be paid. But I think UEFA has acknowledged that things have been distorted as a result of COVID. I think what is also interesting is that they have they've created what they refer to as a watch list of quite a few clubs. And what they've said with regards to these clubs is that you probably would have breached the financial fair play limits, but you've claimed enough COVID allowances to be able to circumvent that. And that's included Chelsea, Manchester City, Leicester, West Ham and Rangers. And they've said, yes, you've used COVID, but remember you are assessed over a rolling 3-year period, and your COVID benefits are going to drop out. And when they do, by then you need to have ensured that your finances are improved. So what are they doing as far as this watch list is concerned? Well, UEFA's requirements is effectively they've got to submit more documentation on a more regular basis to ensure that UEFA can see effectively in advance whether or not they're likely to breach the rules. It's a bit like getting a suspended sentence but having to report to a parole officer. And Uncle Terry says that it's not perfect. It's not ideal, but it's better than doing time inside.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be Uncle Terry's parole officer. The parole officer goes to Uncle Terry, not the other way around. 8 million quid to PSG is the equivalent of me waking up in the morning after a night out and thinking, I'm sure I had a £5 in my wallet. Oh, well, never mind. Basically, and are we? Is that going to be your reaction every time Chelsea gets mentioned now? Are they your least favourite club now?
I genuinely don't know how I'm going to react when Chelsea play Palace. But I suspect I'll be going, come on, you Eagles. It's that bad at present. And I've got no issue at all with Graham Potter leaving. From a professional perspective, it's the right thing to do. I just think the timing absolutely stinks to high heaven, and they're using the sacking of Tuchel to act as a smokescreen for the absolutely appalling recruitment they've done under Todd Bowley when he appointed himself as effectively the director of recruitment stroke football. It's if they'd done it at the end of last season. If they decided they didn't like the coach at the time, then fine. That would have given Chelsea a chance to bed themselves in over the summer. It had given us a chance to recruit a management over the summer. But as what they've done, they've just screwed us over.
Yeah,
but that's football.
Yeah, you can't blame the man for wanting to be in a proper.
No, not at all.
Wanting to go to a proper city with a club with noisy fans and all that sort of stuff. Look at the different types of quinoa he's got access to now as well. Now he's in the city. It's Palace fans. People may not know this, but Palace's game at Brighton next weekend had already been postponed because of train strikes going on. And Palace fans were highly delighted about that, given the form that Brighton were in. As soon as Graham Potter left, Palace fans were saying, "Well, we need to unpostpone that game, don't we?"
Well, the strike's off.
The strike's off. So we'll see what happens. And Adam, I believe Adam Lallana's in temporary charge, is he?
That's right. Yes, it could be me. For all I know.
I imagine you haven't got time, Kieran. Imagine the Baroness's face when he said, "I've finished my spreadsheets. I've got a couple of podcasts to do, and then I'm off to the Amex to manage Brighton for the day." Questions. Our first question is it's a really interesting one. And it comes from Victoria Zhong. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Victoria. Victoria says, "I'm a Liverpool supporter from Peru." Insert Paddington reference here. "And I want to introduce a crazy idea to English football. In Peru, we have something called Copa Peru, which is perhaps similar to the EFL trophy. It's played between our 3rd through to our 6th divisions. What is very cool is that the winner of the Copa Peru gains promotion to the Primera Division, that is a big prize. We relegate the lowest 2 clubs in the Primera Division and promote the winner of Liga 2, apologies again for the pronunciations, along with the Copa Peru champion. Almost always, this newly promoted club is relegated straight away. But Nacional used their sudden entry into the Primera Division in 2017 to quickly obtain more funding and actually won the league in 2019. That would be impossible to see in the Premier League, but financially, could it work? We see lower sides cause problems in one-off cup ties, but could a club jump from League 1 or 2 to the Premier League, use the new TV and add money to buy some new players and survive?" So essentially, this is I don't know, pick any club. This is Mansfield winning the Papa John's Trophy and being promoted to the Premier League as a prize. Could they, as Victoria says, maybe pull off a shock, use the money, get a couple of players in, survive? It's a great question. There's a great incentive to play in that trophy as well, the Copa Peru.
I think it's a fantastic idea, and from a fan's point of view, you and I we like travelling to the chances to go to places like Mansfield and Morecambe and Forest Green are very restricted. So I think it'd be absolutely amazing. Won't happen, but so effectively, what she's saying, if it's 3rd through 6 divisions, it's League 1, League 2, and the National League.
Yeah,
so you could have you could have Altrincham in the Premier League for a season. That'd be absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Could they do it and survive? Her question. Well, the simple answer is yes, they could, because if we go back to 2011, when Blackpool were promoted, now I've got very strong views about the Blackpool owners, but I bet this is not the time or place which to say them. But what Blackpool did was that they had a very, very low wage cap because the owners took out £11 million in wages for themselves and didn't pay the players very much. And Blackpool were within 1 or 2 matches of survival. So if they could do it, which was effectively on a mid-table championship budget, then a club from League One, and let's face it, we've got some big clubs in League One, Ipswich, Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Charlton, Portsmouth. There's some decent sized clubs in League Two as well, and we'd like to see some. Yeah, we'd love it for Andy Holt.
Yeah, cool.
If Accrington and we'd be so made up for Andy and others and our friends at Plymouth and so on. So it could be done if you think that Huddersfield survived 2 seasons in the Premier League when they were promoted. Everybody said they'd go down straight away. I don't think they'd last very long, but could they last one additional season? Yes, and finishing 17th would be one of the greatest achievements in Premier League history. Should it take place? I think it's a fantastic idea, and also I like Victoria because it's one of my favourite songs by The Fall.
Very good. Imagine Gary Neville's reaction on being told that Accrington ruined the Premier League for a season.
Yeah, it could be Salford.
That's true. Yeah, imagine Andy Holt's reaction if it was Salford. Yeah, for the new listeners, those two people don't get on very well. Daniel Robertson has a question, which we have sort of discussed before, but this is a specific question, so I'm happy to ask it again. Also, it's got my name in it, so as I'm as vain as a cat, I'm perfectly happy to read any question out that's got my name in it.
Cat's vain?
Oh, yes, cats are very vain.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, not just... As again, a discussion for another pod, Kieran.
Right.
Daniel Robertson's question: as a listener to the Offensive podcast, in which the price of football was featured, and also as a relatively new viewer of a television show that I shall call Ned Losso, as I'm aware, Kevin has some beef with a show with a similar name. Both heavily feature the Premier League, Championship, other teams, and sports personalities and broadcasters. Is there a financial implication involved in using these names, and regarding the latter, often including club logos as well? Or as works of fiction, does this bypass any relevant laws? And would an agreement first have to be made before any use can be done?
Well, I think we need to separate this into 2 elements. If in the show... the Richmond FC, which I think is the team involved with Ted Lasso, if they are using the Premier League logo, or if they are nominally playing against Palace or Manchester City, and the shirts of those clubs are being used, I think there could be issues with regards to intellectual property. So. Therefore, under those circumstances, I think there would be a relatively nominal fee paid by the producers of the show to the other football club for use of their intellectual property and also use of the Premier League logos and so on. When it comes to the individuals, and we've seen some of the pundits from Sky and so on appear on the show. They would just get they just get an appearance fee as per normal as a guest. So there would have to be some form of agreement because there is a protection by the Premier League of its property in exactly the same way as if you listen to a song on the radio, then the Performing Rights Society are entitled to a royalty to collect on behalf of the artist. So there would be costs. I don't think there'd be significant. Certainly, nothing compared to the sums being paid to the people at the top of that show.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Hugh Roberts, and it's an interesting question, but it does make me wonder exactly how long our backlog of questions actually is. Because Hugh's question is about travel to away games. Hugh says, I remember that Manchester United and Wrexham played each other in the second round of the 1990-91 Cup Winners' Cup. And United assumed they could treat it as a normal away game. However, UEFA required they had to stay the night before in Wales, as it was their rule that clubs stay the night before in the country of the opposition. Is that still the case? Because if so, it does have some financial implications, does it? If you're a smaller club with less money, you've now got to fork out for hotels the night before and presumably the night of the game.
Yes, that they don't have to do that anymore. We do, as you probably realised from the show last Thursday. We do now have a transport correspondent that I pick the brains of, and it's normally deemed to be common sense to go there the night before, because if you're chartering a flight and it's delayed, then the last thing you want is players. Yeah, we've seen on a few occasions where kickoffs have been delayed because a coach has been stuck in traffic. Well, that's a risk that you take in respect of aircraft as well. But it's no obligation anymore, and also that does make sense to a degree, because we now have competitions run by UEFA where you could have, for example, 4, 5, and potentially from 2024 onwards, we could have even 6 Premier League clubs in the Champions League, and it would seem crazy that you must go from Manchester, say from London to Paris, which is a relatively short distance, but that's 2 different countries. You have to go and have an overnight stay there, but you wouldn't have to do that if you were going from London to Liverpool, which is in the same country, but wouldn't require an overnight stay because it was deemed to be the same country. So it's no longer a requirement. I think it perhaps falls into that classic desirable but not essential feature that you sometimes see on job applications.
Yeah, I bet Graham Potter's looking forward to the Champions League, isn't
he? More than I am.
Finley's in and out like a fiddler's elbow today, isn't he? Is he?
Every time he hears the word Graham Potter, he opens the door and walks out, and he just gives me a soulful stare as he and the tail is between the legs.
Oh dear. Alex Walton asked this question. Thank you, Alex. Alex Walton says, with your recent discussion on National League finance, can you tell me which league has the greater disparity proportionally in finance, the National or Premier League?
Right. I did have to take a look at this one, Alex, and as you can imagine, I'm very grateful for this question, because it's taken me out of my post-Potter stupor back into spreadsheet heaven. So I've looked at the I've looked at the figures for 2019, which is the last season, which was not impacted by COVID. And if we take a look at the Premier League, the financial disparity on a percentage terms between Manchester City and Huddersfield, it was over £500 million, but it works out as 426%. If we then drop into the National League, there's lots of clubs that don't publish figures, but the biggest disparity I could find, and I suspect this will be magnified this season and last season when the figures come out, was with Wrexham at the top. And remember, this was in the pre-Ryan Reynolds era. And like many people, I'm watching that documentary series at present, which is good popcorn throwaway TV. Apart from the Sean Harvey bigging up element, but that's for another podcast. Wrexham compared to Ebbsfleet was 309%. So the financial gap in the Premier League was bigger in 2019, but I suspect that will be reversed in 22-23, because Wrexham are in a very strong position to, I think, potentially have record revenues in the history of the National League this season.
They're getting around 11,000 people for home games. It's amazing.
Yeah. And also, having been on a Fans United day at Wrexham way back in the 90s, I just love their fans. You were treated with so much love and affection because you turned up from another football ground just to say, we don't like what your owners are doing. And the Wrexham fans that day were absolutely incredible. So they deserve some good times.
That's 3 things, by the way, we've already mentioned. That's for another podcast. So guy's going to be getting ideas, isn't he? Our next question, Kieran, comes from Wayne Harris. And Wayne Harris is a Brighton fan. Now, putting aside my astonishment that Brighton actually have a fan with Wayne as a name, I'd have thought Kieran was. I just imagine the posh people in Brighton's ticket office going, we've got a Wayne and a Kieran. What's happening? What's happened to Rodney? Wayne Harris says, Kieran, our club Brighton have...
Told you that's timing.
Well done, Finley. Our club Brighton have replaced the plastic glasses in a number of the kiosks. That's the least of your problems when it comes to replacing something. Our club Brighton have replaced the plastic glasses in a number of the kiosks on the concourse with paper cups. Now, I'm assuming this is on the basis that they are more environmentally friendly than the plastic ones previously used. The paper cups have branding from Heineken, one of our existing corporate partners. Would there be a new commercial agreement for this type of change as a new form of advertising? 100,000 paper cups per game is a significant amount of advertising. If so, how much would this be worth? Or is this an extension of the existing deal? Or would it be a deal where Heineken supply the cups at no cost to the club, so making a saving there? It's an interesting one, right, Kieran, because as Wayne points out, that is a lot of extra advertising for Heineken, isn't it? If everybody's passing around a paper cup with their logo on it.
Yes. And there's also been sort of, again, for people that don't listen to the show every week, we do have quite a long backlog of stories. So there's been further developments on the Brighton paper cup story.
Oh.
Or should that be the paper trail?
Nice.
So what's happened is, yes, they did experiment with paper cups, but they didn't work because if you think about it, the kiosks where you're serving up the beer, well, if somebody's trying to hand you a paper cup, the chances are it starts to spill because the paper isn't sturdy enough, even with waxed paper. So what they've now done at Brighton is that they found a new supplier who supplies a plastic cup which can be recycled, which is good, which it's a very Brighton thing to do. But if it isn't recycled, it's biodegradable and turns into a harmless wax. So, from Heineken's point of view, they're quite happy to contribute towards this because, as you rightly say, they are getting their logo on everybody that's buying a pint or other products of a similar nature. So I don't think it's costing the club a lot more money. Because Heineken will be making a contribution towards the costs. And it does go as a contribution towards the environmental and sustainability commitments of the club.
Yeah, I imagine as well a lot of your fans complained that Chablis doesn't taste quite right in a paper cup, is it? You wouldn't want your half-time Chablis tasting of paper, would you? Ben Clark has a question, and this is, again, a subject we have talked about before, but I'm always happy to revisit big stories for new listeners, basically. And Ben Clark says, does sponsorship contribute towards financial fair play? Because if it did, rich owners could set up shell companies and sponsor their teams for a lot of money to increase the club's income.
Yes. Well, first of all, Ben, sponsorship income is one of the three sort of traditional tiers of football club income, which is matchday broadcast and commercial. The value of sponsorship deals has to be calculated in terms of what the Premier League and UEFA now refer to as fair value. So if I give you £1,000 for a paper cup, for example, UEFA would say, well, that's not worth £1,000. It's worth 10 pence. So therefore, when it does its FFP calculations, it would go in as 10 pence. So this is to stop clubs having relationships with what are known as related parties who have wealth and are prepared to put that wealth into the club through alternate means in order to allow the club to comply with financial fair play. And so there were accusations levied at Manchester City with regards to their sponsorship from the Etihad, and the club was fined, I think, in 2013 with regards to that, when Newcastle were acquired by PIF, which is, remember, less than 12 months ago. Almost immediately, the Premier League owners went and changed the rules in relation to sponsorship income. So that is it is being addressed, because I'm not on either side of the fence here. It's been set up simply to ensure that Newcastle are less competitive in the Premier League. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing depends on whether on what side of the fan fence you're on. Because the established clubs don't want extra competition, because, as we said before, 6 into 4 doesn't go in terms of the Champions League. 7 into 4 doesn't go any easier. So if you do want to set up a shell company, you can do that. You can certainly bring the cash into the club, but it wouldn't be included in the FFP calculations.
Yeah, as I remember, Kieran, I think UEFA devalued PSG's sponsorship deal with Qatar Airlines, didn't they? They said that Qatar were paying too much for that.
Yeah. There's been a few investigations, and I think both PSG and Manchester City were given sanctions in 2013, 2014. Yeah. There's the trouble is with these type of things, and this is where I've always got a few reservations. To a certain extent, it becomes whack-a-mole. So if it's sponsorship deals of front of shirt from related parties, that's one thing. We then look at the situation that we had at Everton a couple of years ago, where the former business associate of the club owner paid £35 million to have naming rights for a stadium for which planning permission had not been granted. And because he was not deemed to be a related party, that £35 million did count. So what's going to be the result of these new rules? It's going to mean that our silver-tongued friends, and I include my profession in that as well, will simply sit round the table and say, OK, these are the rules. Let's go through them with a fine-tooth comb. Let's identify the weaknesses in those rules, and we can circumvent them. So unless there's a change of culture within football, all I can see as a result of the rules that we have in place is very lucrative fees being charged by accountants and lawyers and their advisors.
I feel I have to say this, Kieran, because otherwise I will wake up sweating in the middle of the night, regretting it. But I believe you had whack-a-mole in that Mexican bacon sandwich. You had. And I can always rely on your childish sense of humour to get me through them. Our next question comes from Utsav Srivastava. Utsav says, as a Real Madrid fan, my pronunciation is terrible today, especially of Spanish and South American Spanish. As a Real Madrid fan, I've seen that we often sell our youth team players with 2-year buyback options. Carvajal, Morata, Negredo, Reguilon, and many, many more. With FIFA's restrictions on the number of players that can be loaned out by a team, what is to stop clubs from stockpiling players by selling them with a buyback option? They still get the benefit of keeping the player or selling him on for a higher fee if he succeeds at the loan club.
I think this is an issue which UEFA and FIFA are trying to identify. It effectively follows on from the last question. If a rule is introduced by FIFA and UEFA, and the rules are to stop factory farming of young men in terms of their professional relationships with their employers, they could certainly sell them with a buyback option, which is so cheap that it's effectively a glorified loan fee, and that would work fine. So I think he's come up. I think there will be some lawyers, Utsav, who are gnashing their teeth at present because you've come up with a really good idea for circumventing the rules.
Well done, Utsav. Send your details to Kieran and you can sort it out between you. John McNeil has one of those questions that I like so much because they seem like very simple questions, but they're actually one of those you think, why have we not discussed this before? If a player has been loaned to a club with an obligation to buy, does the player agree personal terms and contract with the loanee club before the loan, or will a contract only be negotiated when the obligation to buy clause has been triggered? So, in other words, if he goes to a club for a year, do they do the actual transfer deal then or at the end of the year? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a cracker, this one, John. You would have to agree terms in advance, because otherwise, if there is an obligation to transfer the player's registration, and that these are, I think this happened when we loaned Anthony Knockaert to Fulham, and the deal was if Fulham are promoted to the Premier League, then Fulham have to buy the player at the end of the season. And Fulham didn't want the player by the end of the season, but they ended up having to buy him, and then they didn't play him anymore. So the player and the player's representative would, at the obligation to buy date, which is effectively when the original contract is signed, they would negotiate as part of the overall arrangement for the players' pay and remuneration details to be agreed between the two parties. And that makes sense, because otherwise the buying club could say, well, we've got your registration now for the next 5 years. We're going to pay you a tenner a week, like it or lump it.
But also, I suppose, Kieran, what happens if, say, Palace loan a player, one of our youngsters, with an obligation to buy, and that player scores 45 goals in that loan? So they're actually buying him for a lot less than they would have done had they tried to buy him a year later.
Yes, yeah, and that's the advantage of getting that type of arrangement, where it's an obligation as opposed to an option. What would happen under those circumstances is the chances are the club which has been the beneficiary of those 45 goals, they either offer him a really good new contract, because otherwise he's going to be unhappy and he's not going to play as well the following season, or they effectively buy him from Palace at the agreed fee of, let's say, 5 million, and say, well, he's just scored 45 goals in the Championship, we're now going to sell him for 20 on to somebody else.
I'm just checking, Kieran, that motor scooter that went by your window just then didn't have Findlay driving it. I just had this image of Findlay being so upset by Graham Potter in his little crash helmet, his tongue sticking out like Scooby-Doo.
The mystery machine.
In the mystery machine. It was a mystery what went on in that machine, wasn't it? Anyway, we've got two questions left, Kieran, and they're both interesting ones. The penultimate one is from Joe Weinstein. Joe Weinstein says Ashley Fletcher spent this. Oh, Findlay, it is hitting him hard.
He's heard you. He's very distressed.
He is, clearly. Shove a wonky chop there. He'll forget it soon. Joe Weinstein says Ashley Fletcher spent the second half of last season on loan to my local club, the New York Red Bulls, in the MLS. If there was a fee paid to Watford for the player, would Watford's journal entry have consisted of unearned revenue, as the transfer window in England was closed at the time the loan was agreed?
I mean, this is accounting nerd heaven on a Sunday morning, isn't it? Very rock and roll. When Ashley Fletcher, Finney's attempt to say debit and credit there. When the transfer took place, that's when the revenue was earned. It's the date of the contract. So Watford, despite the fact that the UK transfer window was closed, that's an irrelevance. It was a transfer which was made within their accounting year end, and therefore it's that's Finley talk for comeback, Graham. It would be treated as actually a sale, and they'd recognise the revenue.
Okay. Sam Young has our last question, and you mentioned earlier that sponsorship was one of the three main pillars of what was it you said? What was the expression, Kieran? The three
main pillars of revenue in a football club.
Pillars of revenue, that was it. Well, this is a question from Sam Young about one of the others. And Sam says, my club, Aston Villa, have been under fire recently for what are seen by many fans as expensive ticket prices for some home games. Now, some defenders of the price argue that if we are to be competitive with the top teams, our revenue needs to increase, therefore justifying the higher price. At a time when costs of living are going up, however, I can't help but think it's quite naive of the club to increase ticket prices. Is this fair? What proportion of revenue does ticket sales make up? And does that make price rises a necessary evil?
Right. In terms of what proportion of revenue does ticket sales make up, in the Premier League, it varies. The lowest I've ever seen is 3.8%, which effectively means for when Huddersfield were last in the Premier League, and fair play, by the way, to their owners at the time, they effectively froze ticket prices. I think at a pretty low level following promotion to the Premier League. They earned £3.80 out of every £100 came from ticket sales. If we contrast that with Scotland. Rangers, for example, they earn £60 out of every 100 from ticket sales. So it really does vary significantly. Ultimately, if you say, well, how much is ticket revenue going to be? It's the number of matches multiplied by the average attendance multiplied by the average ticket price. So how can Aston Villa generate more revenue from match day? And Villa average 11%. My granddaughter's just arrived, right. So Finley is now in giddy heaven.
Is she wearing a Graham Potter mask? Hence that response. Yes, carry on, Kieran.
So Villa earn around about 11% of their revenue from ticket sales, which is below the average in the Premier League. They would normally make around about £18 million a year. Now that compares with Spurs, who are probably going to exceed 100, perhaps 110. Manchester United are around about 110. Arsenal, in a Champions League year, which I know is going back a few years now, would be 100 million. Liverpool 80 or 90. So can you see that there's a very significant gap?
Yeah.
So the choices that the bigwigs at Villa have is that they can either increase ticket prices to give them more money to allow them to compete from a financial fair play point of view. They could redevelop the ground and have more commercial and hospitality seats available, and therefore they could maintain the prices for the regular fans and target the hospitality market, or they could get into Europe and play more games. But there's a chicken and egg situation there. They need to generate more money to allow them to get into Europe, which will give them more money on. So that becomes a virtuous circle. So in respect to Sam's question, is it fair? Is it fair that the owners should put the money into the club? I think it's. We could have a 3-hour, very esoteric conversation as to fairness in terms of the way that fans are being treated. People are short of money at present.
Yeah,
we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. People are having to make difficult decisions when it comes to heat or eat, and discretionary stroke luxury spend on things such as football matches are being curtailed.
Yeah. Now, that huge difference, Kieran, between Huddersfield and Rangers, does that reflect the huge difference in the broadcasting deal between the two countries?
It does, but remember, Rangers would also have had some benefit from participation in the in UEFA competitions, which Huddersfield wouldn't have had. But I think it's also indicative. If you take a look at Scotland, both Rangers and Celtic do have fans who turn up and fill their grounds every week. It's not just for the league games. It's not just for the European games, but they'll do it if it's a Scottish Cup home match against Morton. And that's no disrespect to Morton, by the way. Their fans are completely committed to the cause.
Yeah, good kit, Morton. I like it. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that'd be very kind of you. You can go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. We shall be back on Thursday, and in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, folks, thanks very much for your support from the show. We do appreciate it. We appreciate you keeping us on our toes. If you want to support us through Patreon, that's one way of doing it. If you want to do it another way, if you go onto your app from which you download the podcast. And if you can give us a review, if you can give us 5 stars, that would be absolutely great. I won't name any celebrities on this particular show, but I'll be back. I'll be back with my little black book of celebs on Thursday.
Very good. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.